Hello. Okay, so I hope you've had a glass of wine or something, because my presentation goes off on a bit of a tangent. But that's okay, you like tangents, right? I'll tell you a bit about me so you understand why I'm talking about writing. So my background is as a strategist in ad agencies. I did that for many years. And then I had a kind of midlife crisis, slightly premature midlife crisis, which I recommend, by the way. Get your midlife crisis in early and then often. And I sort of reassessed what I wanted to do. And I thought I've always wanted to I've always liked writing, and maybe I can launch a writing career of some kind. It's kind of now or never. So I've now published 2 or 3 books. And I write for, I write sort of non-fiction books about human behaviour. I'll show you a couple in a minute. And I write journalism for the FT and for Wired and The Economist about things that interest me, basically. So I'm in quite a good position in that point of view. I can actually just choose what I want to write about. And somewhere in the middle, they kind of overlap. So I wanted to talk about why you should write, not necessarily professionally, but why not? And just so why I think writing is useful. So I want to start by saying I don't think the industry is actually broken, and I'm almost tempted to just do my talk about that, but that would just be unnecessarily argumentative. And okay, I don't think it's broken. However, this guy makes a good point. After he's introduced this news from Netflix, right at the bottom here, he says, yeah, maybe we should all quit our jobs and write for Netflix. So Netflix are making 700 new shows in 2008. I mean, this is an astonishing amount of shows, astonishing demand for content, right? And Netflix are not the only players in this area, right? So in TV, in movies, there's an incredible demand for stories, for content, for IP. And so if you are, you're in this industry, right? So you think you are sort of some creative, right? You like to think creatively. And my sort of friendly challenge to you tonight is why not create something at some point, either now or think about it, and actually try and sell it in the marketplace, because I think it will be good for you. It'll be a great challenge for you, and I just think it will make you a better person, which is what I'm going to talk about. But I'm going to focus specifically on writing. Now, I don't write fiction. I write books about human behaviour. So I wrote a book about lying, which got reissued with this, became suddenly very current over the last year and a half. Got reissued with that cover, and a book about the power of curiosity. And I write sort of long-form journalism, so I write kind of long reads for various publications. And although I don't write fiction, the fact is there's a lot of merging going on at the moment because of this incredible demand for stories. So I'm talking to TV companies at the moment about doing a dramatic adaptation of one of my pieces for The Guardian last year. That thing is kind of happening a lot, right? So stories are kind of jumping from one arena to the other. So it's another kind of incentive to think, well, hang on, maybe I should actually create some content myself. And I just think, creating content yourself is, I guess, the kind of the message that I want you to take away. I'm going to talk specifically about writing, though, about actual kind of like longhand writing. Well, not necessarily with a quill, but words and paragraphs, and why I think writing sentences and paragraphs is good for you, for the work that you're doing now, and is good for any kind of future work you do, and it's just good for you as a person. So 5 things I've learned about communication, creativity, and life from writing. I mean, this could be a book, right? This could be a self-help book. So 1, writing makes you smarter. I actually feel like I've got smarter since I really started taking writing seriously. And you might say, okay, well, you're starting from a low bar, but Whoever you are, if you're someone from high bar, I think you can actually get smarter by really, really forcing yourself to write and get better at writing. Because writing is a form of thinking. There's this, people have said any writer understands this intuitively. And in fact, if you've done some writing, I think you'll get this as well. Just even in the act of writing a brief or writing a sort of an ame to a client, I write to find out what I'm thinking, right? So your kind of conventional idea of what happens when you write something is you have this kind of pre-verbal stuff in your head, which you then just translate into language, into words. That's not actually how it works, and writing forces you right up against the reality of how it works, which is as you're writing, the writing kind of forms your thinking. It makes it clearer, for one thing. It absolutely kind of makes coate what was inchoate, right? So this kind of mess of stuff you have in your head, you are forced to put down on the page. And it's really painful, right? It's really, really hard work. One of my favorite quotes about writing is from the novelist William Mann, who said, a writer is somebody for whom writing is more difficult than most people, right? A writer is someone who really, really sweats over the sentences and the words and knows how hard it is to get it right. But in getting it right, I think you improve your thinking and improve your ideas. And this is connected to this second thought, which is it's like a sort of regular reminder that there isn't this kind of idea, this creative idea out there, and then there's the execution of it. The execution and the idea are always woven together. There's a great quote from Steve Jobs, which is in Curious, and of course you can Google it, I have to say that, where he talks about what happened when he left Apple and John Scully took over, and how Apple went wrong in the kind of dark years of Apple. He says, after I left, Apple got a very serious disease, the disease of thinking that a really great idea is 90% of the work. And that if you just tell everyone, here's this great idea, then they can just go off and make it happen. And he goes on to say, because I've sort of chopped off a bit, it's fitting 5,000 things together, and every time you try and fix that, something else goes wrong over here, and then you have to fit that. He's talking about the process of creating technology, but the same thing is true of writing. If you've ever written a kind of fairly kind of lengthy piece, it's all about kind of putting details together and making that. And every time you kind of fix that paragraph, then that means you have to go back there, and you're constantly thinking, what's the real kind of thinking and theme and idea underneath here? And that is how the magic happens. So at the end of the day, when you get a kind of great idea and a great kind of piece, a great piece of technology, that's how it happens. It doesn't come from somebody saying, oh, here's an idea, now you just go away and execute it. And I think that's a kind of a fallacy that we are particularly prone to in this industry. We kind of think there's the idea up here, and then some people kind of just do it, and it doesn't work like that. And one of the biggest things I've learned from doing a lot of writing is to stop worrying about originality and being the first person to say something. And it's given me a more sophisticated idea, actually, of how creativity works. So again and again, I've thought about an idea for a book or a piece, and then I've thought, well, yeah, but somebody has said that already, or somebody's done that. And then, for whatever, I do it anyway. And in the act of doing it, the originality becomes apparent, because, okay, somebody might have said this or done this or written about this, but when it's filtered through me, through my sensibility, my sort of unique prism, and this is true of everyone, right? Everybody has a unique kind of set of experiences and knowledge and personality, then it comes out as something original. So I read a piece for the Financial Times called How the Madmen Lost the Plot a couple of years ago, and it's very, very successful. Lots of people read it, went kind of crazy viral. And there was nothing particularly original in it. And when I was writing, I was thinking, I'm really just saying stuff that people have said already, right, in various places. So but you get through that stage, and by the time it got out there, it had been sort of filtered through me and my kind of way of doing things and my kind of way of thinking, and it came out and it felt, reasonably fresh. I sometimes think about this as the rubber soul effect. So when the Beatles were recording Rubber Soul, an album they made in 1965. They were listening to a lot of Motown. They were really into black American soul. And they felt, I think, slightly apologetic about it. I think they felt like, oh, it looks like we're just sort of copying Motown here, so we'll make this kind of little joke about it in the title, Rubber Soul. Now, I'm a huge Beatles fan. I love this album. I'm also a huge Motown album and a big sort of soul fan. This album sounds nothing like Motown. Sounds nothing like American soul. I mean, actually, if you listen to it, you can kind of hear the influences. But they had taken their influences and they'd been filtered through the most kind of amazing ecosystem of creativity, ever, perhaps. The four of them called the Beatles. And by the time it came through the Beatles, it sounded like something absolutely kind of groundbreaking and radical. So when I'm thinking, oh, is this original? I sometimes think, don't worry, it'll be one of the great creative breakthroughs of all time. And a fourth one is let the idea lead you. What I mean by this is, like, if you're a planner, particularly a strategist, you often think quite logically about the creative process, right? That's kind of your natural predisposition. And we sometimes find it hard to say, but hang on, there's this kind of really sexy, cool idea, line, image, or whatever it is. Maybe we should kind of just work around that. Actually, we do kind of end up post-rationalizing things, but we don't particularly like it. And I just think the more kind of writing or the kind of content creation you do, the more you find that happening, and the more you kind of respect that process of saying, okay, I worked out how to make this thing work. Even though I didn't understand why it was cool in the first place, I've now worked out why it was cool, and I've kind of worked my piece around it. Made me think about this recently was listening to a talk by an American writer. The talk was not given by J.D. Salinger, by the way. That would be pretty cool if I found a secret YouTube tape of him talking. It was given by Dennis Johnson, who wrote a great collection of short stories called Jesus' Son, which I strongly recommend. It'll blow your minds. Brilliant writer. He died a couple of years ago. And as an aside in this piece, he was giving a talk to students about creative writing, and he said, "Oh, my latest story is called, I think it was called Triumph Over the Grave." And he said, to be honest, I came up with the title first, and then I kind of worked out a way of telling a story around it. And he said, I think that's what J.D. Salinger did with Catcher in the Rye. He said, if you think about it, Catcher in the Rye, that metaphor at the end of Holden Caulfield kind of stopping kids from running off the edge of a cliff in a wheat field. He said, that's really lame, isn't it? He said, think about it, it's the most kind of like on the nose kind of like clunky metaphor you can imagine. And my strong suspicion is that Salinger just was writing this book and just woke up one morning with this beautiful phrase in his head, Catcher in the Rye, and thought, that's a great title. That's a great title. Okay, how can I make this work? Shoved in this metaphor at the end. Okay, so this is the last one, and I think this is probably the most important, and it's important to your creative endeavors, and it's important to your work, and actually it's just important to life, or at least I have found it that way. I've got a lot better since I started writing at distinguishing between the noise and the signal when it comes to my assessment of how I'm doing, of how good I am, and of how good a piece is. So there's a kind of clip in a film called Hearts of Darkness, which is a documentary about the making of Apocalypse Now. Again, strongly recommend you go and watch it. It's absolutely amazing story in many ways, but it's a great example of somebody being incredibly creative under pressure. So Francis Ford Coppola, right in the middle of this movie, he's in the middle of the jungle shooting this film, and there's just a scene in it where, because they have a terribly kind of chaotic time making it, where he is talking to somebody he's working with, and he says, do you know what, I just pretty sure now that this film is not going to be very good. And he wasn't saying it, and he wasn't kind of throwing a tantrum. He wasn't kind of highly emotional. What struck me about it was that it was quite a cool, seemed like quite a cool, rational assessment of where he thought he had a lot of rushes now. I've been looking at the film. He's like, yeah, this is not where I wanted to be. I'm pretty sure this is going to be a bad film. I mean, that's sad, but that's where we are. Okay, so now it's voted like the best film of all time, or it's in the top 2 or 3, pretty much every poll of film. It's an astonishingly great film. So he was so sort of vastly wrong about assessing how good it was. So sometimes when I'm, in the middle of a book or any kind of piece, or a radio, so I've written sort of radio comedy for Radio 4, any sort of creative piece, and I'm thinking, this is terrible. Then I think about that clip of Francis Ford Coppola. I'm not saying, by the way, that my piece about Financial Times, Mad Men is on the same level of Apocalypse Now, but in some ways it had sort of similar themes. I've just sort of learnt to distinguish between emotional weather and emotional climate, is one way of thinking about it. And this is why it's sort of applicable to life and not just work. So there are days when I've written something and I think, this is absolutely fantastic, and then I come back to it the next day and I'm like, well, it's mediocre at best. There are other days when I think, this is absolutely terrible, and I come back to it a week later and I go, I could use this. And I've learned just not to trust my instinct. That's why I say not right now, right? So trust your talent and trust your unique sensibility and trust your vision, but don't necessarily trust what you're thinking about it right now. That's more like the weather, and trust in kind of long-term climate trends. Oh no, we're back to apocalypse now. But that is, also a way to think about, I find, your emotional fluctuations. So when I'm feeling down now, and this is partly something that I have got better at because of writing, if I'm feeling down, I'm much better at saying, well, okay, you're feeling down now, but the overall picture is quite good, and you'll be back up again at some point in a couple of weeks. So just be down, that's fine. And so you just learn to deal with the kind of the ups, and I'm not saying I'm bipolar, by the way. I think I'm really kind of normal temperament, but everyone kind of goes up and down a bit, and you just learn to distinguish between the short-term fluctuations and the long-term trends. So I think I've said all I'm going to say. I hope you're all going to go home and start writing. Thank you very much.